If you love books, then you may well have heard of her. She is the academic, fashionable, and very bookish Rory Gilmore, the star from the show Gilmore Girls. And I'm watching the show for the very first time, and I can't believe I've never seen it before, but it was recommended to me because I love books, and I'm really enjoying Rory as a character and how academic and how much she loves books. So I was curious, how many of the books that Rory reads have I read? Now, there is a bit of debate online. There are a few different lists circulating, and some people speculate that some lists just have books that are just mentioned in the show that Rory doesn't necessarily read, and then there are technically official lists that have all of the books that Rory's read, but even those seem to be incomplete. So just based on the list that I could find, I cross-referenced what I had read compared to what Rory has read or maybe is just mentioned on the show, and I had only read maybe 25 to 30 of the books that are listed out of hundreds on the list, on Rory's list. So the books that I have read include the Harry Potter series and a ton of classics because Rory loves to read classics just for fun. So I've read 1984, Brave New World, Fahrenheit 451, Pride and Prejudice, Metamorphosis, Lord of the Flies, Romeo and Juliet, Frankenstein, and you get the idea. But I haven't read a classic in so many years, so in a bid to catch up with Rory and get some inspiration from her reading list, I decided to pick one of her favourite books. Now, in Season 1, Episode 16, Rory and Dean have a conversation about a book that Rory has recommended to Dean, and that book is one of the biggest books I've ever read, and certainly the largest classic I've ever read. So it is Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, and Dean claims that the book is not accessible, it's way too challenging, and it has too many characters that have names that end in ski, because it is a Russian novel, which does make it quite challenging with all of the character names, which I'll get to in a minute, because that's more challenging than just them having similar names. But Rory is adamant that Leo Tolstoy wrote for the masses and that it's actually a very accessible book, and she believes it's beautiful. Anna Karenina is considered one of the greatest works of fiction of our time, and so I figured maybe it's time that I read it, and I wanted to give myself a big challenge. I thought maybe reading like Rory for a week might involve reading a few of her books and maybe reviewing some of the ones that I've already read and talking about Rory's tastes. But doing this feels like a really big challenge, and it's something that I really wanted to sink my teeth into and to push myself, and I feel like that's something that Rory would do, so it just feels perfectly fitting. So the work itself was released in 8 parts, which is, I guess, why it's so massive. It is 350,000 words around about and over 800 pages, and the type, as you can see, is not small. So I have my work cut out for me. I decided that I wanted to read this in a week. I did cheat a little bit and give myself a head start on the weekend. So I'm up to here. So I haven't given myself a huge head start, but I have finished part 1 of 8 parts. It seems to be maybe a smaller part. I don't know if I'm just thinking that because I have so much ahead of me. I will say so far I'm really enjoying this book. I can see already why this is considered one of the greatest works of literature. The language itself is so beautiful, and I think Rory is right. The language is relatively accessible. Some classics, I do find that it does take you a while to get into the zone with reading them, and that's probably why I tend towards contemporary fiction. Authors in contemporary fiction do a lot of the work for you. They keep the language relatively simple and straightforward, and they focus more on the plot rather than making the language very flowery, as opposed to in literature and classics where the language can be harder to understand. So of course it is a lot more work to read a classic, and I have been using the audiobook version as well to speed up the process a little bit so that I can get this done in a week. However, I actually find that listening to the audiobook has been less helpful to me than I thought it would be. It's actually a little bit more confusing when listening. I'm finding it harder to concentrate on the story and understand what is happening rather than just reading it. But the audiobook is helping me save my neck, because if I read this for the entire week, I know that my neck will be absolutely ruined. It also means that I can multitask a little bit if I'm going for a walk or if I'm cleaning or whatever it is, then I can listen to the audiobook, so I can read a little bit more than I otherwise would. I do prefer a physical book. I'm not against audiobooks, it just depends, but I will say, because there are so many characters, and there's not actually that many characters. The challenge with the characters is that they have multiple names. So it's explained at the front that in Russia, and I don't know if this is true of modern day Russia, but it certainly is for this book, is that there are a lot of different ways of addressing people depending on who they are to that person. So it is helpful to have the physical book because you can go and reference the character list. But to give you an example of one of the characters, so for example, Princess Ekaterina Alexandrovna Shabatsky, I'm probably pronouncing that terribly, but that's her full name. So there can be different combinations of that name, but there are also a shorter name. So Katerina, Kitty, Katya, and Katenka are all references to her, and they're used throughout the book. So the same person can be referenced by maybe 6 different names, and you just have to pick that up from the context. It sounds more complicated than it actually is, because even before I properly realized that, I was still keeping up and realizing that they were nicknames for the same person. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a summary of what is happening in Anna Karenina so far. I don't think I'll be ruining anything, even though I already know the ending because it's quite famous and you probably do too, but I'm not going to say just in case you don't know how it ends. But I'm going to give you a summary of what has happened so far. First thing that happens is that we meet a husband and wife, and the husband has had an affair, and the wife, named Dolly, one of her many names, but we'll call her Dolly because it's the easiest name for me to remember, is very upset with this character. He has his sister come to town because he thinks that the sister, Anna, our main character, may be able to help smooth things over. So while the sister is in town, she does manage to smooth things over, and while she is there, she decides to attend a ball. Now there's another character called Kitty, who is the sister of Dolly, and she is single and looking for a husband. She has just been proposed to by, his name has escaped me, Levin? Yes, Levin. He has just been proposed to by Levin, and she has turned him down because she thinks that Count Vronsky, I'm just clarifying these names, yes, Count Vronsky is going to propose to her, and I suppose she thinks he's a more interesting match. So at this ball, Kitty is assuming that she's going to dance with Count Vronsky and after that receive a proposal. But at the ball, Anna and Count Vronsky end up dancing together. Now, a little detail about Anna that is very important is that she is already married with a son back in St. Petersburg. And they have this dance together, and it is very clear that they have fallen for each other, whether it's love or lust, but it's very intense. And the way that Tolstoy describes it is so beautiful. But essentially that is the plot of the book, is about these two people and an affair that ensues. That's on the back of the book, so no spoilers there. Levin is also mentioned on the back of the book and his story, which we're just establishing. So he's had a proposal turned down, and then he goes back to his farm where he lives, and he reflects on the fact that marriage is the number one thing for him. So basically he's heartbroken, but he's also, I don't know if actually heartbroken is the right way to describe it. He's just really disappointed because he pictured his married life, and that is something that he deeply, deeply wants. It's number one for him as opposed to just something that he wants to achieve in his life. I don't really know how that story is going to continue, and I don't know why that is mentioned on the back of the book as an important thing, because I would have thought the Count Vronsky Anna affair situation was a big enough plot line, but it is a very big book, so I'll have to see how that all develops. It'll be interesting. But I'm going to read a little bit of the scene just because I think it is so beautiful how they fall in love. So this is Kitty observing Anna and Count Vronsky on the dance, I was about to say on the dance floor, but they probably didn't call it that. They're at a ball doing some kind of dance, which I forget what it was called, but that's besides the point. She saw in her a streak of the elation of success which she knew so well herself. She could see that Anna was drunk with the wine of the rapture she inspired. She knew that feeling, knew the signs of it, and saw them in Anna, saw the tremulous, flashing light in her eyes, the smile of happiness, and the excitement that involuntarily curved her lips, and the precise gracefulness, assurance, and lightness of her movements. And then a little bit further down, it says, "No, it's not the admiration of the crowd she's drunk with, but the rapture of one man, and that one, can it be him?" I just love the way that he describes, the way he uses language to describe that basically they're falling in love while dancing at this ball. And I guess that's why the book is so large, because each scene is described in a lot of detail, but I don't feel like I'm getting bogged down in it. It has only been a few days. It'll be interesting to see if I can get this book done by the end of the week. I'm a little bit nervous. about whether I'll be able to achieve it. And I hope I'll get it done by Friday, because then technically it will be a week, even though I don't know if Saturday counts because I barely got going. I think I did like an hour of reading on this. But we will see how I go. I'll keep you updated. Let's see if I can read like Rory Gilmore herself. So it is Tuesday, and a little update on where I'm at. I finished part 2 yesterday, so if I keep going at this pace, then I'll probably do 1 part per day and I should meet my goal. I've come across some big plot points that I did not expect. In part 2, chapter 22, if you happen to have this edition and you're curious about what I'm talking about, there's a big kind of plot twist. It was just something that I didn't anticipate happening, and it's obviously going to change the entire story, but I was so shocked. And then I think it was chapter 29, so Anna has this discussion with her husband, and I was really surprised with how it went. So I was kind of expecting the affair to be a highly secretive thing, and then maybe accidentally people find out, that kind of thing. But what I've learned is, so in the book they're all aristocrats, so they're prince and princes and princesses and whatnot. Something that was kind of normal in this society, and I presume this is reflective of the time, was that affairs were just accepted for men and for women. The key thing was that if you were going to have an affair, to keep it private. So even if people knew about it, it shouldn't be obvious in everyday life. So when you're out in society, it shouldn't be obvious that you're having an affair. But unfortunately, Anna is making it obvious, according to her husband. So the mere fact that she's having an affair is like, her husband is fine with. He just doesn't want other people to see that. You shouldn't disrupt the social order. That's the key, which is obviously something to get your head around. It's not what I anticipated reading the book. I assumed just the affair itself would be scandalous. And if it were okay for men to have an affair, I would probably be able to get my head around that as well, because of just the time that this is written. This is written in the 1870s, so it's a long time ago. It's obviously a very patriarchal society, and the kind of themes around women I will definitely talk about in my summary of this book. It's kind of what I anticipated, but yeah, I'm really surprised that women were also allowed to have affairs. It's just like, if you're going to do it, be secretive about it, even if the husband knows. I'm still intimidated about finishing it. There's still a long way to go, but I also am really excited to know what happens. Like, I really want to know what happens next. Can't wait to get back into it this afternoon. I'm going to be reading, and hopefully I will get to the end of part 3 today. We will see. A quick update from me. It is Thursday and I'm around 70% through the book. So I've been zooming through it, not because it's a fast read, but because I've been really committing to this project. It is beautifully written and I've certainly been enjoying it, but parts of it definitely could have been an email, specifically part 3. Wow, that part dragged on. I think it was 33 or 35 chapters, and oh my gosh, I really wanted it to be done. But I felt like there were probably important details in there that needed to be set up, and there were. But some chapters, wow, they could have been taken out for the purpose of brevity. At that time, I don't think they were necessarily concerned about brevity. There are many chapters that talk about land, and while it is a little bit interesting, chapter after chapter talking about land can get a little bit tiring. I think it was the same in part 5. There were a bunch of chapters about art. I think it was, oh yes, I remember 2 of the characters, who I don't want to say who, have just gotten married, and they spend a time in Italy, and you would think that spending time in Italy and talking about art would be really interesting, but the art chapters really drag. So there are times in the book where things are incredibly detailed and maybe just things that I'm not interested in. After the end of part 3, things do get exciting. There is an engagement, which is really cute, and I love how Tolstoy describes this engagement. There is a wedding, which is beautiful as well, and there is also a death, so there's a lot going on. And there is another big event, which I don't want to say because 1, it's a spoiler, and 2, maybe trigger warnings. So if you are going to read this book, maybe just check those. The pace really picks up after part 3, maybe just because I was more interested, and there is a lot that he is saying there is commentary on philosophy and morality and marriage and what is a good life. One of the characters that I was really resonating with at one point was the character Levin. And because after his failed proposal, he goes back to his farm and he reflects on life. And even though he considers marriage to be the most important thing in his life, and he is so yearning to get married, he decides to connect more with the land. And I really liked his connection. These chapters were slow moving, but at times it was really beautiful. He decided to mow his own fields, which maybe doesn't sound like a big deal, but he is an aristocrat, and that's something that peasants did at that time. He also really connects with the peasants, and then he comes up with ideas about the future of Russia and maybe be able to be shareholders in the land rather than just work for a wage. And he even presents this idea to some of the peasants, and they don't even believe him because they are so used to the higher class people taking all of the money. So they don't realize that he's actually trying to help them. And he spends a night out with the peasants on this haystack, and he even considers marrying a peasant at one point. Those ideas do change over time. So he was quite a likable character for quite some time, but then things have changed and certain events, and I'm not sure how I feel about that character. Honestly, I don't know how I feel about any of the characters. Something that I don't know if it was intentional, and I'm assuming that it was, is the characters are highly emotional people, and maybe it's just reflective of the time that your social position is so important, the social order rules, and marriage is so important, and children, and the characters, if they can't fulfill their duties or if they're stepping out of line in any way, their feelings are very overwhelming, and maybe that's just reflective of the society that they live in. But it can sometimes swing from I love this person to I hate this person to I'm going to get a divorce, I'm going to forgive them. There's a lot of up and down and dramatic things that happen that I won't spoil for you. But there are some scenes that are actually quite heavy and dark, but I found them funny because I don't know if Tolstoy was trying to make them comedic, and I did look up one scene and just have a Google and say, is this meant to be comedic? Because I actually laughed out loud, but apparently according to Google, according to other people, it's not actually funny. It's actually a very heavy scene. It was just the way that it was written. I think because the characters are so extreme sometimes in the way that they react to things, and I suppose it's reflective of the time period and to create a lot of tension in the novel, which is certainly there. There's a lot of tension, and I certainly want to keep reading. Next week, I'm reading exclusively beach reads because I do not feel like another one of these. It's not that I wouldn't read another Tolstoy. Maybe I'll have a crack at War and Peace one day, but that is a huge novel. I think that has 200,000 more words than this or something. So, I mean, that's a really big commitment. But I just need a palate cleanse. I need something light. Hello, so it is Friday. I have made it to technically the last day of reading like Rory Gilmore. My challenge that I set myself, technically I started Saturday last week, so this is now a full week. Did I make it? Yes, I did. I'm so pleased to say that I finally finished Anna Karenina and I feel very good about it. So today it is very drizzly and cool here in Queensland, which is not the most usual, even though it's winter. It's never normally that wintry, but it actually feels kind of wintry today. So it is the perfect day to be talking about Gilmore Girls, and Anna Karenina is kind of heavy and it feels like it's fitting of the weather as well. So I have my warm tea and a sweater on, and let's chat about Anna Karenina. Okay, so first of all, it is heavy, literally, and it is heavy in topic, I will say, a lot of the book. Not all of it. I mean, there are certainly some lighter themes and some really happy and sweet moments, but it's a heavy book. So that's the first thing to know about this. So Rory Gilmore obviously doesn't mind heavy topics. She doesn't mind a quite intense read. That's something that I've learned about her this week. And I'm certainly not as... I don't know if smart is the right word. I'm probably not as smart as her, because if she just devours this for a fun read, then that is not me. I mean, there were times this week when I deeply, deeply regretted the decision to take on such a big novel. And especially, it's not just the size of it. I mean, getting through this in a week is a challenge in and of itself, because I am normally quite a slow reader. I've really I've been amazed at how much my reading speed sped up this week just because I was putting so much attention on this. So I feel like it fixed my attention span and it sped up my reading speed. So it's been very good for my brain. So I highly recommend this if you want to improve your brain and if you feel like a little bit of a goldfish because you're constantly scrolling and getting distracted by things, then this could be a great option. Partway through the week, I definitely was regretting my decision because it's an intense novel. It's a lot to get your head around. The fact that it's a classic, it's not just the sheer size, but the fact that it's a classic as well. And look, the writing is relatively accessible. I don't think it's super complicated. It's not a classic where you feel like you have to look up every sentence or really deeply focus on every sentence. The writing is relatively simple and easy to grasp, and I presume it was the same in Russian. Obviously, I don't speak Russian, so I don't know what the Russian version is like, but I assume that the English version is as close to what it could be in Russian. So it's not inaccessible, and I can totally understand why so many people study this novel because it's a really fascinating story. It's a story about what can happen to people when they're ostracized from society, but at the same time, it's incredibly intense. I want to go through a few of the themes and things that I enjoyed and things that I didn't enjoy. First of all, something that I haven't mentioned is how women are treated throughout the novel, and at times I felt like Tolstoy understood women in a way that I wouldn't have expected, particularly because he was living in a very patriarchal society, and that is what is represented in the book. And other times he made his female characters really two-dimensional, and I found that extremely frustrating. But I would go from a few chapters of being frustrated to chapters where I was pleasantly surprised that he understood how a character might think and feel. There's a lot of philosophy throughout the book, and that was probably my favorite thing because I love philosophy. He references Plato's Symposium. The characters often talk about the meaning of life, what is a good life, what is morality. They talk about religion and whether that should play a part in somebody's life. And that actually is a really relevant thread that at times I didn't know where it was going, but it makes sense by the end of the book. So that I really appreciated and was something new for me. And actually, there was one part of the book where I felt like I just kept thinking of Man's Search for Meaning, which is one of my favorite books ever. So I really appreciated that part of the book, but I didn't love that none of the female characters seemed to engage in any of these discussions, which I just didn't think was very realistic. It seemed like Tolstoy didn't view women as having the intellect to have discussions like this, whereas I'm sure they would have. They just weren't represented in literature. They weren't having the voice to do so. But something you need to know if you are going to attempt this book and you haven't read it already is it is relatively tragic. There are very heavy themes in here, so have a check of trigger warnings and make sure it's something that you do want to get into. I didn't find it too overwhelming in terms of the heavy themes. It's just the sheer magnitude of the book. I just deeply regretted it at times, especially when the chapters were going on and on about land or discussions that I felt like weren't super relevant to the plot, or we were focusing on things that weren't particularly driving the story forwards, and that Tolstoy wasn't attempting to be brief in any way, shape or form. And of course they didn't have Netflix back then, so their attention spans were, I'm sure, a lot longer, and being able to read a really long drawn out book was a beautiful thing. And in some ways I have enjoyed that, but in other ways I have found it incredibly frustrating and heavy to get through, and I was deeply concerned about whether I would finish this book. I don't think I would have if I hadn't been able to chop and change between the audiobook and the physical book so that I could multitask, driving, cooking, whatever it is, while listening to the audiobook, so that I didn't always have to have the physical book. And also I would have ruined my neck if I'd done the physical book all week. I found it easier to understand while I was reading the physical book. For whatever reason, I guess I was just more engaged, but the audiobook is actually really well done. I think, like I said, maybe it was yesterday, I don't think I'm going to run out and buy War and Peace and have another crack at Tolstoy. I may one day, but War and Peace is even longer than this book, if you can believe. But it really has inspired me to read more classics, so I have Rory Gilmore to thank for that. But for now, I need palate cleansing. Next week, I'm going for beach reads, light and fluffy. Nothing terrible happens to the characters. That is very important to me. And definitely no books that are over 800 pages long. I think that'll be my rule for at least a few weeks. So thank you for following along as I read like Rory Gilmore for a week. Maybe it's inspired you to do the same, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.